is really about your next strategic plan and when you're doing the planning for the plan. Um, and you've already got something in place, so do you need to just update it? Do you need to, in fact, go back to the beginning and do a complete from scratch kind of approach? So that's what we're going to try and cover off in this. And let's just advance here. So we of course are going to record, and it's being recorded, and we'll share the slides afterwards with participants. And of course, everything is going to be available on our website for future reference to download or to access the recording, which will be up on YouTube. A little bit about Upstream. We are a new public sector consulting firm working in 5 different content areas around policy, user experience, learning, development, strategy, and engagement with stakeholders and partners. And our approach is to always look at kind of the upstream solutions. What kind of prevention can we deal with to solve the problems today and sort of figure out how we can come up with a better tomorrow. We do have a limited time offer for associations that if you're interested in getting a fix on kind of where you're at organizationally, where your maturity level is on these different domains, that's something that's available. It's a free 1 hour kind of run through, and you'll get a customized report about that that gives you some recommendations around what to work on to advance to the next level. A little bit about me. I have 20 years plus in regulation, bureau regulation within Professional Engineers Ontario, where I dealt with policy and strategy as well as governance, CPD. So these are all bread and butter issues that cut across a regulatory body. Prior to that, I spent about a little over 10 years with the Ontario government and the Ministry of Community and Social Services, and a stint and secondment at Cabinet Office for about 2 years. And while I was at PEO, one of the things I initiated was a network of all of the profession regulators to sort of begin to knit together, share best practices. And we'll go into a lot more about me, but we have 2 previous webinars that were recorded and that are available here. One was around right touch regulation, and the other one is around the upstream approach, or sort of prevention approach to problem solving. And you can find those on our website. So let's dive right into the key question here. Assuming that you have a strategic plan in place, it's coming up, you're looking at it and saying it's coming for renewal, and chances are it's one of a series that you've done over many, many years. And the key question you ask for all kinds of reasons in terms of budget and resources, the amount of time that you want to put into that, and really getting a sense, first of all, nothing stays the same. So what has changed in the interim while you were executing that last strategic plan? What's still relevant? What has changed dramatically? What's changed a bit? And therefore, when we look at that, do we in fact simply need to update it, to modify it in some fashion, or a delta approach? Do we need the de novo approach of starting fresh, or perhaps a combination? And so really what we're going to walk through today is kind of the questions. I'm not going to give you the answers, because the answers are things that you'll need to work out. But that's where we sort of start here. And just to give a sort of a benchmark around what great strategic plans are, this is things that come across that we've seen in the literature, we've seen in industry, and some of these reflect my own personal experience. The best ones are ones that are clearly, it's different than a business or operational plan. It's not meant to cover everything. It's not meant to address absolutely everything. And if it's gotten too much detail on it, you're really more of a business or operational plan. And there's a role for that as a separate document. Perhaps it flows from the strategic plan, but it shouldn't be sort of incorporated in that. What you want to do is make sure, of course, that it has been comprehensively developed. And what I mean by that is you've done the market research, you've done the stakeholder engagement, and you've analyzed the insights and looked across the entire ecosystem in which your organization resides, and understanding that those kinds of perspectives on it. You want to strategically focus on only a few major, very high impact directions or directional approaches, and prioritize changes. So you do have to really go through a process of really refining, reflecting on the priorities in the organization that need to be changed. Doesn't mean there's still all the ongoing work that still happens day in and day out, but to focus on here's what we really need to move this organizational approach in a different direction, perhaps, or up a higher level. And you want to be able to have a smaller number, but high impact, really evaluating that. If you've got too many objectives, too many priorities, you really have none. You want to make sure that, of course, you're free of personal agendas. And sometimes this can happen when you have board members who articulate a very strong viewpoint. And you want to make sure that that's not the case. You want to make sure as well that it is grounded in the cause and effect. So you understand the change levers, the agents that are reflected, that are in there, and you want to make sure that you have then taken it and really extended it within and resourced and reflected within the organization. So dealing with policy issues, governance issues, operational things in a way that you're measuring the outcomes that are achievable, and you have very clear activities and clear accountabilities of who is actually to do what and what kind of time frame. So that includes metrics, it includes accountabilities of who's actually there. The other piece here is that you need to make sure that you are communicating this, and you have to really over communicate this as to especially the why we're doing what we're doing, why we're making a change, why it was necessary. And you have to articulate it, you have to message it to, in many cases, different audiences to understand that. And finally, you need to make sure that you are reviewing this and adjusting it at least on a quarterly basis, ideally, that you're looking at what progress are we making, what's changing in the internal, external environments, perhaps, that might change the approach to it. And we might want to make sure as well that we've got some adjustment mechanism built in there, that we can be agile enough and we can adjust where need be. I'm going to switch off this right now. Okay. So you can still hear me. We're going to, I'm going back to regular voice. My headset decided to kick out. Okay, so some of the things, just a high level kind of approach to a decision tree. Really looking first and foremost, do you have a current plan? So where do you stand on that? Is your leadership, your board, or senior management, are they happy with it? Are they happy with how it was developed, what it looks like, and understanding why and why not? If the answer is yes, then you can probably do some kind of a delta approach to it. If you're not happy with it, that suggests that you need to, start from scratch and do something differently. Have you achieved all your objectives that were indicated? If you've, in this case, you probably want to refresh that then and say, okay, are we now at a different kind of level approach to take? And obviously, even if you haven't achieved those objectives, you have to ask yourself why. What was it that held us back from getting those things done? And that may suggest that we need to go back to the drawing board and understand things differently. Did you, in fact, in your current plan, was the stakeholder engagement and research, was it broad and deep enough to really ground it, to really support it and make sure that everybody understood it and makes sense? And if that's the case, great, you feel that it was very robust, you went broad, you went deep, then you can probably suffice with a delta approach just to update certain things If not, then you probably do need to at least go back a bit further, and maybe it can be some combination here as well. Do you have a sense of the current and future challenges? So if you've got a really good sense of that and it's reflected, it's captured within the strategic plan, then you can make adjustments. And if not, then you probably need to do that de novo approach. So some of the things that we want to look at in terms of the internal environment, understanding what's changed. Organizations are constantly in a state of flux, and that may be intentional, it may be unintentional, but understanding what's taking place, what capacities have improved over that time period, either as part of a strategic plan or even outside of that. So understanding the governance issues and challenges that you face, what has changed in terms of the board or senior management and its ability to manage and make decisions. What's happened in terms of your IT platforms, website, your data use and reporting, what kind of legislative or other policy changes internally have you made within the organization that may have changed things? What is your appetite and what is your ability to manage risk and change and to look at the operational changes that have taken place? Often that's a continual amount of work. What's changed as a result of your customer service approach? What are you learning about that and how you have perhaps improved the capacity to gain intelligence through that mechanism as well? What kind of HR issues have you been working on? Understanding that there can be turnover, there can be the DEI issues, there could be engagement issues, etc. That training, things that make a difference in terms of the organization, as well as communication, stakeholder engagement practices, what has gone on, what kind of information, how good is our system, what are we working on to improve. Legal issues, which can be the corporate ones, can be matters of compliance with other reporting, and no doubt a whole bunch of other things. And then the internal program requirements that you have for your processes. So what's involved in terms of, and have you changed anything or has things changed for you in registration, in your professional practice, continuing professional development, quality assurance, complaints, discipline matters. And again, these are things that are all very much in flux, and recognizing and giving credit where credit is due for the changes in capacity and your ability to manage things. You want to make sure as well when you're doing your strategic plan that you do kind of a check-in, because everything ultimately starts with what's the organization, the name, the mandate of this organization. Is it still relevant? Is it something that still resonates? Is the mission itself as identified, the vision, are they clear? Are they clearly understood? Or do we in fact need to do a little bit more of a reflection on that? Some organizations will have a statement of principles or values for the organization of how we want the organization to behave, how we want registrants to behave, etc. So if that's there, then clearly you want to just check in on that and make sure that that still makes sense, they're still relevant, and you can go forward. Because if you're going to change those things, then it changes a lot more of the information down the pipe. Externally, lots and lots of change happening, and much of it is outside of your control. So what's happening and what has happened during that time frame? A lot of things that even 6 months ago were not an issue. Tariffs were not an issue 6 months ago. They are very much an issue. AI was not much of an issue up until about a year ago. Suddenly, with generative AI, suddenly comes on stream, becomes much more popular, and everybody's talking about it. Everybody's worried about it and what it does. Industry changes, of course, economic changes, the political, social, environmental factors. What's happening in terms of your registrants? What's changing in their business environment, in their practice? What kinds of issues are pushing and pulling at them that might influence what you need to do? Understanding perhaps the roles of other associated regulators or associations that have an impact on what registrants are doing and vice versa. The same way, looking at their clients, talking to their clients, what's changing in terms of what's being demanded. Or everybody wants everything yesterday and they want it cheaper, and those are always the issues, but there are often many more concerns nowadays. Government requirements, of course, have to always be paying attention to these things, whether it's legislation, whether it's things like cutting red tape, whether it's um, programs, grants, etc., that will definitely change your working environment. And then looking at what's happening in your particular field, but in other jurisdictions. Are there changes happening in other places? Is this a global kind of phenomenon? Is this a national phenomenon? Are there things that could have some impact one way or the other that eventually will show up if they haven't already shown up in your jurisdiction? So one easier way to do this is you take a look at each strategic objective that you've got. And basically, depending on how many you have in your current plan, you want to assess what's the completion level. What kind of metrics did we have that shows that? How much impact did we have? Did we really move the needle? How much did we really change the organization on the basis of that? Was it relevant? Was it not so relevant? And is that particular objective still valid? Is it something we still need to do? Maybe we've completed it, or maybe things have changed so much that it becomes irrelevant. And therefore, do we need to replace that objective with something else? Do we need to address new changes? Alternatively, you may have reached a certain level of development on that particular capacity, but you need to now take it to the next level. So that's something to also consider. And understanding how each of these things are impacted by the internal and external changes that we previously did that kind of analysis on. And just a quick little chart to do. We can include that as a sort of a standalone thing, but it's not difficult to do. But just basically having this on a one-pager, I think, is helpful to understand why it was completed, why or not, what the reasons were. Do we want to continue that? Do we want to go to the next level or step? And how is it impacted by this? So this gives a certain dynamism, reality check to your objectives. Again, if you're doing all of this in a delta kind of approach. Often we find that strategic plans, they may not have been as well grounded in terms of understanding their stakeholders and reaching out to stakeholders within the organization and outside the organization. So typically we can always extend this a bit more, think a little bit more than the usual crowd. So were there any groups that were missing from the last version, people we didn't talk to? And you can see a list here of in the brackets here of all kinds of different groups that may or may not have been approached. You want to make sure you're not just navel gazing, and you want to especially listen to, I think, your critics that can really provide some interesting insight in terms of what's working, what's not working. So in relation to that, what are the identified changes? So we want to, in particular, we may want to go back to those groups and say, okay, in particular, this set of changes that have happened internally or externally, what can you tell us about this? What's the impact you see? And aside from the element of talking to stakeholders, you want to make sure that you need to do additional research. Do we need to gather any more internal or external data to tell us about what new or emerging issues are there? And a good question to be asking ourselves is, how well do we really understand our practitioners, our clients' needs, their clients' needs and perspectives? And I would say, for member organizations, how well do you understand your members? How do you understand what drives their behavior, their satisfaction with you as their association, and what impacts their kind of work that is going to impact or could impact the kind of work that your association has to work with. of course, the danger with anything with the high amount of change that you've got is you've created a very static strategic plan. You have a rigid plan that says it's the 3 year, 5 year time frame, and we've put it in writing, we've published it, and it should be good to go. Well, lots of things get overtaken by events, and as for those who are Monty Python fans, nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition to happen. And the bottom line here is you can't predict the future. However, there are some things that you can do to give your strategic plan more adaptability within there. You don't want to be changing it every week or every month or every quarter, and not fundamentally, but you do want to build in some flexibility. So there are a couple of different ways to do this. First of all, at the front end, to make sure that you've got better adaptability is you want to make sure that you've gone broader and deeper. When you're looking at those opportunities and threats, you're looking at those things. Have you really understood and thought through what those potentially could mean for you? Talking more and broadening and deepening your stakeholder engagement hopefully will give you a better sense of what could be on the horizon. What are the emerging issues or threats that are going to happen? And so it takes out a lot of the surprise factor. Sometimes it's just you're caught off guard because you don't have the channels of information to tell you in real time what's coming, and you get surprised. You want to take those different situations and develop some scenarios. How do we deal with a major threat that would happen to economically challenge us? If you're a member organization and you suddenly get a 50% non-renewal, or you have something else going on that is going to be a major threat, you want to be able to develop some scenarios. Don't have to get into a tremendous amount of detail, but what kind of possible responses should we have? So at least you've got something that you can kind of take off the shelf, or at least you've thought through a little bit more. Of course, you want to probably go to a shorter time frame, like a 3 year kind of time frame that gives you the more flexibility on that, as opposed to a 5 year or more. Sometimes I see these things, and you're just setting yourself up for it being outdated. And the other problem you get with the longer time frame is just exhaustion, just fatigue of your staff, of your volunteers, of initiatives. If they drag on for 3, 4, 5 years, it's a long time to maintain that continuity, to maintain the momentum, as well as the resources to get those things done. So shorter time frames, probably better. And want to probably add in much more of an agility and responsiveness capacity into the plan. So can we actually put in place something that is, for example, different approaches here. So we'll come to that in a second here and talk about that. So some of the things, again, this is more unique to areas of regulation in terms of professions, but you can extrapolate this on a bit. Government approaches to self-regulation, red tape reduction, the concern from the Ontario Fairness Commissioner about fair registration practices. Are they open to people who are applying, who are coming in from other provinces now, from overseas? And what happens there? Changes that are happening in terms of the education sources and pathways for people who are potentially new registrants or new members. Interprovincial labor mobility requirements. These are things that are going to continue to get heightened, I think. We're seeing this a bit more in terms of amalgamation, partnerships, whether strategic partnerships or full amalgamations with other regulatory bodies, in some cases, related professions, and ways to do that. Are you prepared for that kind of a situation in full or in part? AI use by practitioners, by clients, by regulators is going to continue to climb. And understanding that those are both threats and opportunities, I think. changes that happen in practice, including the employer's insurance needs, business needs going on. Those are going to continue. And are there issues when we have practitioner non-compliance or non-cooperation with whatever requirements you have that can threaten the organization and its ability to carry that out and to say we represent this group, or we regulate this group effectively. So if you're not able to do that, then you've got to ask some deeper questions. Some of the issues that, again, get more public profile around complaints and or disciplinary matters, and what's the resolution time frame, what kind of decisions are being handed out, especially in self-regulating professions. Are they seen as being too harsh or slaps on the wrist for things? And that's where the public tends to get concerned, especially with people who are, serially involved in complaints. So, you start asking those kind of questions. And another threat that happens a little more internal is, your board itself or council, and making sure that they're representing the needs of the organization, the needs of the public, and if that's part of your mandate, and not just personal matters or representing the profession and at the expense of public protection. So these are things that can easily derail a bit. And what we want to do, even if we haven't necessarily built in the adaptation at the front end, it's still in the back end. When you're monitoring these things, you want to be monitoring what are your political, social, economic environment situations happening, and to be able to relay that information. It's great to collect it, but to actually relay it to your senior management so they can actually take appropriate action, or at least be aware of these kind of things. So again, reducing the surprise factor gives you more time to be able to think and adapt. Trying to monitor obviously your progress. At quarterly basis, you'll have a sense of what is on track, what's changing, what's being set back, and why. And as well, you want to work on two lean and rapid processes. One, you want to make sure that in a crisis you have a rapid decision-making structure, maybe a little bit leaner than going through 3 committees, but to get things decided if you need to do that, and making decisions around what you want to do, your response. Can you have some rapid ideation? Can you do some quick prototyping? Can you pilot solutions to be able to do that? And ultimately, these things tend to not always be clear in terms of whose job it is to actually carry this out. Whose job is to monitor the strategic plan, to be able to come up with the adaptations. And something I'll mention as well, a little bit more on the front end, is just maintaining good working relationships with other stakeholders, with other associations, for example, in the same kind of space. So if someone hears about something and that there's a mechanism to share those things, then you're better able to adapt. And coming up on our summary here. So again, you want to recognize that planning your next plan is actually a strategic decision itself, how you're going to go about doing that. And you've got to start with assessing your current plan, look at the mandate, vision, mission, values, principles, if they exist, understanding, evaluating your strategic goals or objectives, and what kind of success have you had with those, more or less, and are there next stages of development that would suggest where you need to go. Understanding your internal changes within the organization that have happened in that intervening period, understanding the external changes that have happened not only during that period, but what do you expect going forward in the near term, in the next year or two. That's probably as well as anyone can project out. You can look at mega trends, you can look at minor trends going on. The mega trends tend to have a little more durability, a little more predictability than the micro stuff. What kind of resources are you willing to commit to your next strategic plan. It's not always available. Sometimes they're very tight. There's other things going on, either other investments that are being spent. And so looking at doing it and also making sure that whatever you're going to put in writing in your strategic plan, you're actually going to be able to carry out. Do you have not just the funds, but do you have the human capital? If you're relying on staff, if you're relying on volunteers to be able to do these things. So we want all these strategic goals and objectives to be achievable. And that's really the critical thing. So is it reasonable to be able to do these things? So sometimes you might have to break them out over a time period or different stages of development that reflects that. Understanding your board's appetite for change. How much are they, how big of an appetite do they have? Are they looking for minor changes? Are they thinking boldly about new changes or a combination? And how well can you actually implement those things? So again, these are questions, considerations that go into that, and the extent to which you're willing to put resources into stakeholder input and research, and to broaden and deepen those types of engagements, not only at the front end, but even on a continuous basis to, help ground it and make sure that you're not caught off guard with these things. Understanding as well your operative time frame. What do you want to expect to achieve? And whether it's a 3-year plan, a 5-year plan, you want to make sure that you're chunking things out in a way that's reasonable. We're going to do X, reach a certain level as an enabling piece in year 1. We go up to year 2, we do this, year 3, and each one sort of building on that gives you a certain amount of flexibility. And finally, to make sure that you're not locking yourself into something too rigid. So building in either a little bit of ambiguity around some of the objectives that gives you, the goal is still there, the goal is valid, as to how you actually get there, how you actually do it. So there might be some subtle differences in terms of what kind of approaches you can take, and you may be able to move those around a bit. But also having built in the capacity within the organization to have the agility to be able to deal with the unexpected, to anticipate in some cases, if not to be able to at least address them, and find a way to sort of work your way through the challenges that are going to continue. And with that, I'm going to open it up to questions, and take it from there.
I'm question free.
You're question free. Okay. That's fine. It's a lot to absorb in the time frames sometimes.
A lot.
Look at there's a lot of questions, as I say. It's when you're committing to something like this, it is higher, it's a public document, it's higher risk, and you want to make sure that you've really sat down and thought through these things. And it's definitely that's a challenge. The positive is that you may not need to, start from scratch. You may not need to do everything if you're satisfied with the processes that you've had in place. And it doesn't hurt to get an outside viewpoint. We tend to have certain confirmation biases, and so we tend to assume that we're all happy with everything, and sometimes having, listening to your critics and other viewpoints may tell you, or comparing it to other similar associations. Doesn't hurt to look at other associations or regulators in the same kind of industry, same kind of space, and say, okay, what are their strategic approaches doing, assuming that those things are published or available. So what are the challenges? Then you can benchmark it a little bit more and say, hey, you know what, we thought it was great, but really it's missing X, or needs to be worked on some more. Okay, so just a bit of a preview in terms of some other webinars that are coming up in over the summer and into early fall. We're doing one in July, which will be on user experience, sometimes called human-centered design or design thinking, and how to use that kind of understanding of your members, your users, your clients, and using that, understanding their process and understanding their needs to be able to improve your service design or your programs, your services that you're going to be offering. In August, we're going to be talking really a lot more about policy intelligence. I don't know if I can quite brand this yet as PI as opposed to AI, but what can we do to, get better information, better intelligence gathering upfront in the policy realm, make sure that we're finding the right kind of information, we know what to do with it. In September, we're going to be talking about stakeholder engagement practices and really moving from the typical stakeholder management approach, which is a little sometimes paternalistic, to one ultimately that is much more of a collaborative partnership model, and how you sort of get there from where you are now. And in October, we'll be talking about understanding learning for your employees and for your volunteers. How do you improve what you're offering, what they're finding, or what they're doing that has impact in terms of organizational performance? And as a bit of a preview as well, we will be offering in the fall some training courses that are going to be available both on live sort of in-house group kind of work, as well as they'll be on demand available for purchase on the website, and they will be offered. And we are working towards a podcast series of interviews and discussions in the winter coming up. Seems a long ways away, but not so far away. And any other further questions, comments, thoughts, anything else that comes to mind?
Just confirming, will you be sending the slides or do we go to your website to access them?
I will send the slides directly to you. Copy of the slides and a link to the, we'll have this up on YouTube, and then we can, I'll send the link to that, but they'll also be on the website.
Right.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks so much for your time. Hope it was somewhat valuable, and look forward to seeing you in future sessions.
Indeed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye.